Did we freeze? There we go.
You did for a second. I like that you tried to sneak that up on me again. Yeah. Like mid-conversation, Brian likes to push record just to
see what we get. You never know what kind of gold you're going to mine.
Are you trying to like get me to say something that's like,
I don't know,
can't put that out there? Or is it just like, because I have a feeling it's more that than
it might be
it's
gold
and we can't miss the gold. No,
yeah.
I don't think it's that.
It's probably that. It's probably having something to blackmail you with.
I think we should do a part 2 conversation from last week.
We should.
Yeah. I'm gonna
hang on though. Cory's a bit under the weather. I would tell you to pray for him, but when you hear this, he should be better.
But there's that like idea that God is above time.
That's true.
So is that
if people pray for you 3 weeks from now about getting healthy right now, does it count?
I remember in college, I had this conversation. And it was like
I did it in high school. Can I pray for a test at the end of the day that I took earlier?
Yeah.
Does that
work? And then it was like it was like an alpha small group, right? So we had people in there that were like thinking about God or whatever. And we had this conversation. I remember the leader had to be like, well, not that this isn't relevant, but can we move on to something that seems more practical?
So it felt really practical in the moment.
I guess so.
When my grade was hanging in the balance.
Which moment? The moment in the past?
Oh, that's some inception right there.
Oh man. Anyway, I don't think we should talk about that.
No, we shouldn't.
And I actually feel fine. I just kind of sound all stuffy.
Well, you might blow your nose halfway through this too, which will be lovely for everyone.
And now that it's a video podcast, I don't know what to do.
Just get out of the screen.
It's just going to be nasty. Last week, I really enjoyed our conversation.
It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, and we were like, hey, what if we just kind of did part 2 of just kind of some bigger picture ecosystem, citywide thoughts. Not that they're not as practical.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's like, a lot of the things we talk about, but from kind of some different lenses. And Brian's all been like,
I know, I've been discovering stuff,
weird kingdom downloads, and the second week in a row, we're sitting out there talking. And I said, stop talking. Let's just go record this, right? So I just think it's kind of a cool, kind of a pause in the action, but I think that people will like relate to some of these things that you're thinking of. And of all things, Brian Johnson brought NASA into the conversation.
Yeah, not something I would normally do.
Right.
But next week, we will get back to like a general flow of tools.
Unless Brian and I are out there having this really deep conversation.
Unless we discover something else. So we will get back to jumping back into persons of peace next week and getting back in that flow of tools. But all right, here we go. I'm just going to verbally process a little bit more because that felt like that's what sort of helped our conversation go last week.
Yep.
But maybe full disclosure, we're not 100% sure where we're going to land the plane on this one.
But are we ever?
Yeah, that's true. So last week we talked about the biggest little farm and biodiverse ecosystems, actually physically restoring the soil on this farm, but then also what does it mean to restore the soil in a city, like the spiritual soil of a city? And then making that metaphor of like, well, we need to cultivate the soil with, 9 billion microorganisms. And we have our number for that. It's not 9 billion. It's like 21,000. But there's still some meaningful math behind that. So just as a way to think through and inspiration, encouragement, like let's restore the soil. That's what Jesus wanted to do. See the kingdom come. And when he said, I want to see the kingdom come, he was talking about the flourishing, the universal flourishing of God in our souls and in all of creation. Make things as they ought to be. So a month and a half, 2 months ago, I'm sitting on a call with a bunch of national and some global leaders that are thinking about this smaller way, microchurches, disciple making. And this one guy says, I think you all should read this book, The Flat Org Chart, which also I've put a lot of people onto the biggest little farm in the Flat Org Chart.
You should get a little bit of kickback for this.
Yeah, right. So the Flat Org Chart is a monograph. You can buy it on Amazon, but just know it's going to take like 2 weeks to get it to you because they don't print it until you order it. So I forgot I ordered this book, and it just showed up last Saturday. And I start reading it, and I'm going, "Oh, I think these two ideas of this ecosystem moving to restore the soil and the ideas that this guy's putting into the flat org chart are supposed to go together.
Yeah.
Like God's teaching us something.
Right.
So here's the premise behind it. I was interested in it because we always tell people we have a flat org chart, meaning nobody's in charge of anybody in the underground. We just defer to one another depending on, who's more gifted in this area or something. So it's not about that at all. It's about thinking about collaboration in a new way in a city, in a bigger way than we've done it. And I can't remember the name of the guy that wrote it. I was just like into his ideas. So just look up the flat org chart or the book. You can get into it, read it yourself. But his premise is we have thought too small about collaborating, and we've often gone too siloed in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, right.
So when you look at a city, there might be 15 organizations all working to help the homeless crisis. And oftentimes, none of them are working together.
Yep.
In a city, there might be 15 organizations working to reduce recidivism rates. And oftentimes, none of them are working together.
Yep.
There might be 100 organizations working with the educational system. And oftentimes, none of them are working together. There might be who knows how many organizations working in the healthcare system, and none of them are working together, right? But actually, the 4 organizations I just mentioned, like, they need to integrate when we consider one person and what they might be going through. That lacked a proper educational system that was thinking about their needs, helping them flourish in all of life, but they couldn't flourish because of some disorder that they're born with, and the healthcare system didn't pay attention to that, whatever, produce the right pathway for them, which meant that they, ended up homeless because of lack of education and pathways forward, and then ended up in jail.
Yep.
And so he's like, we are thinking incorrectly about how to put all this together. And he says, actually, we have a picture of how this worked before in life, like where we could go, we should do more of this kind of work. And the example that he brings up is NASA. So NASA in 1958 has, I think he said 6,000 employees, but by 1963, they had 36,000 employees.
Wow.
So it's a huge balloon of employees, all because in 1961, JFK says, by the end of the decade, so it's very time specific, it's stamped, by the end of the decade, we will put a man on the moon and bring him home safely. So it's
a good qualifier. Right?
Yeah. Which might mean we put a man on the moon before we put a man on the moon and bring him home safely. Yeah. But like by the end of the decade,
I'd like to be the second.
But by the end of the decade, we will put a man on the moon and bring him home safely. So NASA has their marching orders, and it's been called a moonshot idea. It's what they would call a SMART goal. So it's like specific, it's measurable. We can, I think, accountable, whatever they are.
Attainable.
Yeah, attainable maybe. Which is like put a man on the moon and bring him home. Like the biggest computer we had in 1968, or the fastest, is like a simple calculator.
Yeah.
It's like there's a lot of work that has to be done in that decade.
Right.
Those are his points. And so what NASA does is, like, by the end of the decade, they had they were coordinating the research results, output, inventions, all of this stuff for 65,000 scientists and engineers across hundreds of institutions, like colleges, universities, private research facilities, all this kind of stuff. And there's an organization that is designed that's thinking like, this is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to hold your information secret just to yourself. Do your like you have to. You're doing it for the greater good of this goal. And we're going to share information across. Like when you discover something that would help this breakthrough, that's going to help us get a man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade, we're going to share that information over here. You share it up. We make sure it goes over here. We make sure you all talk. But also, you get to continue doing what you're doing. I don't know that he specifically mentioned like the University of Houston, but like this is a university that is focused on research development. They're critical in this whole journey of space travel, all that kind of stuff. They don't stop being who they are. Mm-hmm. They just commit to the bigger goal, and anything that is helping the breakthrough, they share.
Yeah.
But also there's like a crazy amount of good that is developed for all of, society because of what their research helps get a man to the moon and back safely by the end of the decade, but they also produce other things as a result of that have affected our lives for the better. So anyway, it's just made me go like, man, it feels like Jesus has given us these two little images. They're not little, they're significant. I go like, this is what I like long to see and hope that you'll grasp is like restore the spiritual soil where you live. And it's not going to be through monoculture farming practices. It's not going to be one type of fruit, one type of thing.
See last week's podcast.
Yeah. You got to work together for collaboration, but it's super healthy and helpful when you have a NASA-like organization. And I was realizing like, oh, this is like what we're trying to create in the city.
Yeah.
At a micro level, like we're trying to coordinate different hub teams to help microchurches coordinate for the sake of the flourishing of the network, but also for the sake of the flourishing of the city. And this made me go, what's next?
Yeah.
What might happen as a result of like, also now we need to collaborate with all these other people.
Yep. Yeah.
So that was it. So responses, reactions.
So many thoughts as you stir in this, as we ruminate. Is that a good word?
I like it.
We're gonna ruminate in these larger conversations. Obviously, I mean, leaning into this idea is obviously collaboration, right? So it's like, how does collaboration actually work in a city? What stops us from collaborating well? Thinking bigger. Did you mention that? Now I'm getting our two conversations confused from earlier today. Like that, basically the idea is like the starting point was like, okay, something huge. We're going to get a man on the moon back, but we have to think bigger. We can't think in the same ways we were thinking before. Yeah. So in what ways are we thinking about collaboration, like kingdom collaboration in the city? Like in what ways do we need to think bigger and think differently? And I think continually going back to this idea of silos and how that is like the American way, right? Like we don't actually think about partnership in the naturally. It's not our first inclination. And so I got a handful of thoughts. I'll go this direction first. I'm thinking of Kansas City Underground. Okay, we're an organization, but we're as flat as can be. Right? There's not a hierarchy, so it's a support system. So in one sense, within the organization, we try to collaborate as much as possible, help, between hubs and microchurches and missionaries. That's one, inside the organization. But then the larger think outside the box conversation is like, how many people exist in the city already that are doing the things or want to do the things or already have some fruit in certain kingdom activity that it just takes a little bit. It took someone in NASA to think, I got to talk to that guy, that team in Houston about this thing that they could create that would help this over here, right? Like it took some people to think outside of their organization to actually collaborate well. And so the first thing that I think of that hinders us from that kind of collaboration is that we can't help but like put our own logo on first. Like
it's the first barrier that he mentions in the monograph, the first barrier to effective collaboration at this level when we're thinking, what is our big, massive idea? Like if we were to put, we want to see Kansas City filled with the beauty, justice, good news of Jesus, but we do have like a very specific, a disciple maker on every street and a microchurch in every network of relationships. And we actually put 2040 on there early on, or we said within the next 40 years. But he says like, but we often say we can't do this alone. But the first barrier that he mentions is siloed nature of organizations.
Yeah.
We just think our brand, our way,
Yeah.
And if we don't have a few people thinking beyond that and willing to invite everyone up higher to share that, we won't attain it.
I mean, in some ways, we're just describing what the church should be like.
Mm-hmm.
But we're getting even more specific, or maybe broader, or both, where it's like the church is supposed to be that in the city.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, are we just totally like moving past like that's not even possible with the way that we're so, oh man, fractured and have all these different fights or whatever? Like we're thinking, okay, outside of the institutions of church, we're thinking about the city, kingdom come, your will be done, gospel flourishing, all that stuff. So even that we're thinking outside the box, right? But in that we create organizations. That's kind of what we, in some ways you kind of have to.
Yeah.
Like as you get larger and you get, some organization, it's a lot of the ways that Americans find identity and belonging is that we kind of are part of the same thing with the same name or the same logo. Yeah. Every single time I've attempted to do larger collaboration attempts in Kansas City, even when we are on the same page, we can't help figure it out. We can't figure it out. We can't help but wear the hat with our logo first, whoever that is. Yeah. And I don't know what to do exactly. I mean, I got some ideas of things we've tried, but like, I think that we can't help ourselves because we find identity around it. Right. Yeah. And so how do you lay that down? Right. And still have identity. Because I do think that identity part, we have found it really important for us. We got momentum because we had this thing called Underground that people were like, I'm missionaries Underground.
Yeah. And there is an important piece of going like, what is the gift that you bring? Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, like there, again, hundreds of institutions that all have individual unique goals that are like a gift to each other. When you think about the work that we're doing, like we do it in a unique way. That is a gift. And it is like, and again, this is why like last week's conversation about the farm and this week thinking about, okay, how does that like strategically happen?
Yeah. Is
to go like snails are snails and you need them. They just feed ducks. Yeah. You know what I mean? Right. And the duck's waste is a part of the, what is happening in the soil to like give good places for the roots of the fruit trees to produce fruit. Mm-hmm. They all just need to be who they are. And nature will like automatically sort of create a healthy ecosystem on its own. But humanity, we got these things called souls, man, and we're searching for identity because it's broken. Right. And we're looking for family. And there's like a healthy way to embrace this is who we are. And I don't have to make you do my thing. Yeah. We just need something bigger and beyond us that we can agree on and go like, what's your gift in this bigger thing? You know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's where like the bigger vision of, man, we want to see the whole city restored and we just can't do it on our own. But also there's already people that have been doing it. How do we get together?
Yeah.
And he says like one of the next barriers from that is, it's like a couple of things. There's like a lack of good facilitation of helping these people like keep bringing the vision back up higher. Like don't get locked in, look up, you know. And then like genuine accountability and deadlines. Like, are we going to come back together and actually do this? Are you like, we got to create space to be present with each other to actually move that thing forward.
Yeah. Does he talk much about relationships in that? Like who, I'm someone who's tried to do a lot of this stuff in the city. And it's always interesting when someone is put or placed by someone else to be a role like that.
Yeah.
Because we don't trust other people. We don't know these people. And then you automatically get the American way of competition. Is my ministry better than his ministry? Is my ministry as good as her ministry? Right. And we're like trying to, we have those infighting. Yeah. So that stops us from collaboration. But I see what you're saying. I mean, there is keep pointing to the North Star of what's the bigger picture, what's the vision. And that, I mean, I'm like, I feel like I'm the negative guy today.
Like, is it possible?
No, I mean, I just see the barriers of the fact that we can't totally function like at the NASA within our city. But two things pop in my brain. First, I remember reading a story. Nope, not a story, a book when I was in the seminary called, if I remember, I think it was Leadership Next by Eddie Gibbs.
Yeah.
And just kind of describes, and one of the things, I don't even remember all the things that he went through about what like this new generation of leadership is going to look like in this post-Christian world. But the one that I remember thinking was less hierarchical leadership and more teams, right? Flattened teams across the board that function differently, right? So that has stuck with me for years, and I'm so glad that we something that as an organization we're leaning into, and it's messy in some ways. You have to do hard work of family, like to be unified and stuff like that is like you have to do hard work, but like that I think Citywide is the same conversation. We've got to think flattened. We've got to think you do your thing really well, we do our thing really well. We can't just recreate the wheel, all that stuff. The second thing is like I remember early Share the Hope years when we had these microchurches full of people coming out of jail and addiction, and like all these issues kept coming up. Like this person's struggling with this, and they need a car. This person needs a phone, but they also need a place to live, and they need all this stuff. So we just, lots of people have done this. This is not like, hey, Cory, you're so smart. I was like, how many ministries exist already that do that? And we started making a list. And then I emailed some of those ministries and said, would you give me your list of things, right?
Yeah.
So we ended up creating this 2-page document of all these resources that already exist in the city. And we, for a season, became kind of what we're describing on a smaller level of like, we started collaborating, partnering, help us with this. And it really was, in terms of, I don't know, partnerships, is one of the best I've ever seen because everyone, it's just overwhelmed. There's so many needs and it's overwhelming. And so have people with their eyes open to try to communicate between is such a key practice.
The dude that wrote the book would challenge us on the hierarchical thinking.
Oh yeah. Interesting.
I know, though, it's just ironic because it's called a flat org chart. He would say you actually need some hierarchy because you need somebody that will help work through the interpersonal conflicts that will inevitably arise.
Yeah.
Like you need somebody that's going like, you guys are fighting about this and it's not the point.
So is that why you've just named yourself CEO?
No,
Casey Underground?
No, I don't think I would
I can't even say that sentence out loud. CEO of Casey.
I don't think it would even be appropriate for our organization in that way.
Yeah.
It's more like when you get to this like larger collaboration, I think we actually do it well where we would go, it's not about hierarchical, which are two different words that have some different meanings, by the way, which I looked up once.
Wow.
Anyway,
that's next podcast.
Yeah. It's about, I think we do it well in light of spiritual grandparents. To go like, you need people that are higher up that will keep going like, let me call you up to this again. Let me remind you what it is that we're doing by when, and the more you fight, the more this is slowing this down.
Yeah.
Because we need to keep coordinating toward the bigger goal.
Yeah.
But I think that we want to keep that relational dynamic at play of, it's not hierarchy in power. It's hierarchy in like, who are the people that love well and support well that I will continue to defer to, when they go, hey, let's keep going toward this. Like I'll go, okay, my bad. I forgot.
So really in the end, it's about relationships. Is that fair to say?
I mean, he actually pushes towards some, like, you actually need some really gifted people at the top that are going to coordinate all this. But it's because you have a bigger goal than any of them have on their own.
Yeah.
And when you put that, he calls it a robust goal, by the way. When you put that robust goal out there,
so good.
People look at that and go, that's bigger than me, and I want to help do that.
Yeah.
But me saying yes to that doesn't mean I don't still get to go do my thing. And he also, to go back to it, like another sort of piece of this that we talked about last week is there's also like a huge financial investment in this. It's like, you got to make more room for people on your team to be a part of that. Like NASA employed a whole lot more people.
That's interesting. Yeah.
which is like, he's saying like, we've put so many billions into like the bigger NASA at a federal level. He's like, we got to get more localized NASA people and invest in those places really well. And it makes me go back to the conversation we had last week. I don't know if I said it or not, but I think so. Just the whole, like, it does take investment. They had to build the big worm farm thing. And it's a willingness to look at what you're doing and go, where and why would we invest in different things that actually help achieve that bigger thing, rather than just maintaining what we've done. So let's do this. Can we make it quick? Unless you had another.
But it might be a bigger shift also.
I was going to say, in the last few minutes, how do we make this like practical? Yeah. We've rambled around at some big thought level stuff here. We ruminated well.
Yeah.
I have some ideas on the practical side.
Yeah, I can take what I was thinking and try to
like turn it that way, make a transition.
Yeah,
make a transition.
I believe that most of the resources needed to both financially, spiritually, people exist in your cities already.
Amen.
And so we probably just have to make a fundamental shift. And this is for leaders, but it's for everyday people. A fundamental shift from I will do this to I will find others who God's already doing this in. Yeah. So I think that there takes a level of intentionality with that, but also, I don't know if skill set is the right word, but at least practice to be like, all right, I'm going to genuinely find those champions in the city over different areas, people groups, kingdom ministries, and I'm going to develop relationship, not so they can be a part of my thing, but we can have this greater, larger thing that we talk about. So it does take some vision casting, but it's not around organization. So I wonder if those of you who are seeking movement, seeking gospel saturation ideas in your city, or if you're in Kansas City, we don't seek collaboration probably enough on the big picture. So that's probably, practically speaking, the big thing that jumps out to me.
Yeah, and I think practically for our ordinary everyday people in Kansas City that do listen to this podcast, and is like, think about who you can collaborate with in your network already.
Even in micro settings, there's the big picture.
Yeah.
Who what's it going to take to reach this micro setting? Yeah.
And that's the question. The wig take,
what's it
as you
take?
guys saw. Like, like put some meaningful timelines and stuff around it. I mean, I don't think we have to go crazy on this and be like, well, our microchurch didn't achieve this. I will say, last week, talking about the biggest little farm, it took them 8 years to get to like a thriving ecosystem that was flourishing. In NASA, they barely squeezed it in the decade. You know what I mean? They didn't have a lot of time left when they finally achieved their goal. And I have been thinking about, it's like, it's 8 years, 9 years. Like, there's a long-term play here. But if you're like trying to reach, a particular affinity, a network of relationships, like, who's already doing that?
Exactly. Yeah.
And to think also higher about, it's not about just trying to make converts in these places, but it's about helping people flourish. It's about seeing the kingdom come in its fullness, not just like, well, somebody prayed a prayer, but like also they're activated on mission. They got a set body of good works. They have their thing. And the long-term process, the 8-9 year thing, is releasing more and more of that across every pocket of people in the city.
Yeah, that's good. And the idea that you can partner with almost anyone in some way. And that's a lot of missions and movement and disciple making movement type of thinkers. A lot of us historically have been outside the box, trailblazers, like apostolic type of people. And sometimes we can rub people the wrong way, because when you do new things, you challenge old things, and then you can have some pride with it. And it's just silly. That's a word I don't use enough. It's silly. Robustly
and
silly. And so we got to be humble. And so I think the second part of this conversation is we have to fight for unity. Like, we have to, I know it seems weird, because it's like, we're going to go do this thing. We're going to reach our people, right? We're going to start groups and microchurches among the people, the ground level. Yeah. If you're a leader, or just, I mean, really anyone, but like you've got to fight for unity with other people.
Amen.
And even when you can't, even if it doesn't make sense, like we're not doing the same thing, but let's celebrate one another. That is just a practice that we don't do well in America. I don't know if it's everywhere, if it's just people, but America, because of the siloed nature, because of kind of this, I'm going to do it myself type of nature, we just don't do it well. So fighting for unity is weirdly a missional and movement conversation as much as it is like a shepherding within the church conversation. Yeah. We fight for unity. Then there's collaboration. You do your thing well, I do my thing well. It's not just by word only.
Yeah.
It's actually, I can lean on you.
Mm-hmm.
We can share resources. We can point people to one another. And I think we've seen some inroads in Kansas City a lot in the last decade when it comes to partnership. So that to me is don't think unity is something just within church. It is actually goes hand in hand with movement.
Yeah. Amen. Hey, thanks for letting us just ruminate on these ideas. Hope they've been fun for you. Back next week, Persons of Peace, back into some of these tools within the missionary pathway. See you next time.